Hello, I'm Jane Thurnell-Read, and today I'm going to share with you one profound concept and one simple technique. It's the energy mismatch. So the summary of the protocol. First, check that the system is balanced and you can get reliable answers. Second, decide what substance you are going to test. Third, test the substance. 4, establish whether the tapping technique will work. And then 5, check you have permission to correct the problem, to use the tapping technique. 6, carry out the tap. 7, check that the correction is now robust. 8, if you wish to do more, check that you have energy permission to do more. You ask the question, do we have energy permission to continue? If you get the answer yes, go back to step 2. Step 9, if you wish to stop, check that you have energy permission to stop. Do we have energy permission to stop? A strong, locked response means yes. When I was a practitioner, I was very successful and often had a 2 to 3 month waiting list to see me. And I believe that one of the important reasons for this was the energy mismatch. I'll be explaining about the concept itself, and then also about the energy mismatch procedure and how you correct problems of the energy mismatch. And we'll be looking at it in lots of different ways. So we'll be looking at, the first one we'll be looking at foods and how you can use the energy mismatch in correcting allergies or sensitivities to foods. Then we'll be looking at things like pollens, dust and moulds. We'll also be looking at amino acids, vitamins, essential fatty acids, things like that, how you can have problems with those and how using the energy mismatch technique you can put those right. We'll be looking at various bugs, viruses, bacteria, both acute, chronic and latent infections, and how you can correct those, and you can make some amazing changes to people's health that way. Also toxicity, so things like pesticides, environmental chemicals, how they can affect people, and again how you can correct the problems and remove the toxins from the body. We'll be looking at things like hormones and digestive enzymes, so ways in which they can be out of balance, and the energy mismatch testing can show that, and then the correcting process can help you rebalance those, rebalance the hormone or the digestive enzyme or whatever the body chemical is. We'll also be looking at how to use remedies in terms of the energy mismatch, so homeopathic remedies or flower remedies, earth energies, things like that. And we'll look at something which I find really interesting, is using body substances as part of the energy mismatch procedure. So things like earwax, nails, blood, saliva, sweat, things like that, and what they can tell you about a person's health and how you can improve their health by actually correcting imbalances. I started in practice back in 1982 partly because of my own health problems. I was known as the office hypochondriac. Somebody said to me once, "What's wrong with you this week?" And I realised that people really thought of me as this person who was always moaning, always talking about her health and things. And they obviously thought I was making it up to get attention, but I knew that actually I did have some real problems going on. I used to have eczema, I used to get catarrh, I used to get hay fever and hives. So I had lots of health problems. Then my eldest son was born, and he had diarrhea, eczema, and was hyperactive. So I was determined to find a solution for him. And because I didn't want him to have the life I'd had, which was never feeling well. So I got involved in kinesiology, and then I got involved in health kinesiology. And in those early years, my interest was very much in allergies and treating people with allergies. And so when I first came across the energy mismatch technique, I was interested in it as an allergy technique, and I think that's what most people who get interested in it think about it, they see it as an allergy technique. So I started off looking at it from that point of view. And then I began to understand that you can use it in a much wider setting for all sorts of other things. This energy mismatch technique, which comes from health kinesiology. Health kinesiology was developed by Jimmy Scott. And I've taken one small bit of health kinesiology, which is a wonderful system, but I've just taken this one little bit, the energy mismatch, and I've altered it slightly so that you can use it as a standalone technique. You can use it in your own practices, whatever sort of practice you have, you'll be able to use this and you'll get some amazing results. Even now, and I've been using that technique for 20, 25 years, even now, as I talk to you about it, I'm still amazed at what it does. And I truly believe if you use this and use it properly, use it in the widest context that I'll teach you today, you too can have a practice of 2 to 3 month waiting list. If that's what you want, you can have lots of people coming to see you. And, you know, the number of people who said to me, this is a miracle what you've done. You know, I use this technique, I've helped people with psoriasis, people with hormonal problems, people with thyroid problems, for instance. We've got people right down on their thyroxine levels. I had somebody who was having epileptic fits and was on huge amounts of medication, still having epileptic fits. And she actually eventually took herself off her medication because she no longer needed it. I didn't obviously advise her to stop taking the medication, but she took herself off it and is completely fit-free. There's all sorts of wonderful ways you can use this, and we'll talk about them as we go through today. So the physical body, as we go about our everyday lives, we encounter lots of substances. There's the food we eat, maybe food additives. We maybe take medication or supplements. We breathe in not only oxygen, but also pollens, dust, moulds. There's pesticides in the food, there's chemicals, there's all sorts of things that we encounter as we go about our everyday lives. And all of these things that the body encounters, it has to decide what to do with them. So it has to decide, is this something I want, or is this something I don't want? If it's something it wants, then the body actually starts to do its best to absorb it into the body. So the mucous membranes get adjusted, the digestion starts working, your saliva starts working if it's a food, if the body thinks it's something that it wants. If the body thinks it's something I don't want, then it might try to close down the nose or make you have a runny nose to get rid of whatever's going up the nose. It may start, if it's already in the body, it will try to break it down and eliminate it in some way. So everything the body encounters, every physical substance it encounters, it has, very simply, it has to say, this is something I want, or this is something I don't want. Now, as long as that works properly, everything is fine. So if it encounters things that it should want and says, yes, I want this, that's fine. If it encounters things it doesn't want or shouldn't want and says, no, I don't want that, it's fine. But sometimes what happens is the body miscategorizes things. So something that is beneficial or harmless to it, instead of categorizing it as beneficial or harmless, it decides it's harmful. So you could have a perfectly good organic apple, something that's good for us, but the body might look at this and go, oh no, that's harmful, I don't want that. But if you've already eaten it and the body's saying I don't want it, how's it going to get rid of it? It might give you diarrhea, or it might give you vomiting, or it might do all sorts of things because it thinks it's something it doesn't want. Does that make sense? Okay. But the opposite can happen. Something that's harmful to you, the body can go, oh, that's rather nice. Mercury. Oh, I love mercury. Come in, mercury. Let me give you a seat by the fire. Please come in. All right? That's also not a good idea, all right? That's not going to contribute to your long-term health if the body's welcoming in things that it shouldn't. So the body or the energy system has two options. It may categorize something harmless or beneficial as harmful, Or alternatively, it can categorise something harmful as beneficial. So the energy mismatch is a test of that. So I'm going to show you how to test for it. We're using the acupuncture point 11121. I'll show you all that. But the basic idea is that what we're looking for is, the question we're asking is the body categorising this properly or not? So it's not a test of is this good for me or bad for me. It's a test of is it categorising it properly. People often get confused about this. When I used to teach this workshop regularly, I could almost guarantee that there would always be somebody who would say to me, when we did the practice sessions, they'd say, oh, I've just tested my partner and they're showing us positive on mercury or some other thing, or a pesticide or something. That can't be right, can it? Because they're no good for me, no good for this person. And the answer is, of course, we're not testing whether it's good or bad. We're testing whether the body can recognise it. So if you get a positive response to mercury, what that's telling you is that the body recognises mercury appropriately, i.e., in this case, it recognises it as harmful. So it knows it doesn't want to absorb it, it doesn't want to store it in the body, it wants to stop you absorbing it, stop you your exposure to it if at all possible. Right? So that's something you've always got to keep in mind. It's not a test of whether something's good or bad for you. When you get a positive response, or a strong muscle or a locked muscle, however you want to describe it, what that actually says is that the body categorises it properly. So it's a strong response means the body's categorising something that is harmful as harmful, or something that is beneficial or harmless as beneficial or harmless. Yeah? It's not telling you whether it's good or bad for you. We know mercury is bad for us, but you can get a strong response which indicates the body also, the energy system also knows that it's bad for you.
Question. Why would a body ever sort of miscategorise things? Why would it sort of like reject something that's good and accept something that's bad?
There's an interesting question, and I don't really know the answer to it. I mean, I know it happens, and I don't entirely know why. I think sometimes there can be particular events behind it that happen. For instance, I once had a woman who was allergic to tea and wool, which seems like quite an odd combination of things. But then she told me, after I'd found this, that when she was a small child, she'd pulled down a cup of tea. She'd toddled into the kitchen and pulled a cup of tea off the kitchen counter, onto herself, and she was wearing a woolly jumper, and it went onto the woolly jumper. So that actually started to make some sense of why she might then, having had that extreme situation where there was tea and wool present, that her body then went, oh, I don't know what to do with this in future, yeah? Or actually regarded it as harmful.
In my life, dentist is when I was the most stressed out. And so that was a kit that really allowed my body to release an awful lot of stress because I was so stressed when that happened.
Right.
So one of the things that you've said in the past is sort of like, how do you identify which kit do you need? And for me, it was like, when was I most stressed out?
Yes.
In the dentist.
Yes.
So that I found very useful.
Okay, yeah. And again, you'd correct it in exactly the same way as you correct everything else.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
But the stresses for each individual can be very unique.
Yes. Yes. Okay, another possibility is that sometimes people clearly inherit a problem. Now, whether that's at a genetic or an emotional level or in terms of almost a homeopathic miasmic level, I don't know. But some people, they can have the same problem going through the family. And I'll talk to you, I'll explain about somebody who had problems with calcium absorption and how that manifested actually differently in two members of the same family. But basically, what we're saying is that something stresses the body, and under stress, the body can't identify it properly. And that actually by doing, so you can check it, but you can also correct it, usually, providing you get energy permission from the body, and I'll also talk about that as well.
So just to be clear, what you're saying, that stress actually does the wiring in. The wiring that's supposed to say this is good or this is beneficial, actually something happens and it changes into non-beneficial.
Yes.
Or the other way around.
But it's using stress in a very broad sense.
Yes, of course.
Not just in terms of, the sort of conventional everyday sense of stress where people think of stress as something psychological.
Emotional stress.
Emotional stress. There's also physical stress because you haven't got the right nutrients in your body. There's genetic predispositions, I think. There's all sorts of possibilities. Sometimes people say, well, okay, if you're going to say that, then let's step back and look at the underlying cause. Why actually deal with it at this level? My experience is that actually dealing with it at this level is really important. That sometimes if you correct the underlying problems, whatever caused that the situation to go out in the first place, that if you correct that, it will correct the energy mismatch. But sometimes it won't, even if you correct the underlying problems. And sometimes it's not possible in some senses to go back and change it. And if you've got a genetic susceptibility, it may not be possible to go back and change it. This is a really fast, efficient way to correct things. If you work with energy permission from the energy system the whole time, then you won't go wrong and you'll just get some dramatic results from it.
So what you're saying then is that you don't really need to know what caused it, because if you can release the underlying stress, it doesn't matter what caused it.
Yes. By correcting energy mismatch, you don't actually need to know what causes it. Some people find that slightly frustrating. I actually think for a lot of clients, that's really good, because it allows them to you fix it and they go out and get on with their lives. And you can fix, quite a bit in one session and make a huge difference to people's lives. And okay, then if they need work on a psychological level or dietary adjustments and things like that, if anything, they're more likely to come back to you because they've had this huge success with the energy mismatch. And you can say to people, okay, and I can do other things as well. And maybe it would be time, maybe another session where we look at your diet, or we look at some psychological stuff for you, and so on. Okay, enough talking. Let's have a volunteer. Would somebody like to volunteer? All right, so I now have a volunteer, Anna, and we're going to do some testing. Before I start the testing, I want to make sure her energy system is balanced so that I'll get accurate answers to the questions. You may have ways of being able to do this. I'm going to use the Thymus Tap, which comes from Health Kinesiology. The thymus is just below the sternal notch, and the Thymus Tap, you tap in an anti-clockwise direction for about 30 seconds. The circle diameter is about 3 inches, 7.5 centimetres for those of you who are in metric. That all sounds very complicated. So I'm going to do a quick demonstration. A lot of people get very confused by the anti-clockwise. And so what I always say is, think about your heart. Your heart is on the left, towards the left-hand side of your body, is slightly over to the left. So you start with the heart, up from the heart. So you're going to go up, round and over and down, yes? So we're going to tap round here. And she can tap, I can tap, a third person can tap for about 30 seconds. I usually use 2 or 3 fingers. If you're concerned about electrical polarity of the fingers, then you can take that into account in how many fingers you use for tapping. Okay, so I've done the tap. That usually will balance the energy system, but we can't be certain. So I'm going to do some pre-checks. So the first thing I'm going to do is get her to put her hand over her navel. So if you could put this hand over your navel. Okay, so the middle of the palm is over your navel. Okay, right. And then I'm going to test. So I'm going to get her to hold her arm up, and I'm just going to test. So that's testing strong, as I would expect. Now, still with a hand over the navel, I'm going to get her to say yes.
Yes.
That tests strong. Now I'm going to get her to say no.
No.
And that's going to test weak. Then I'm going to pinch a muscle. I usually use the quadriceps, so pinch. Most of you, I think, will be familiar with the idea of pinching and unpinching and unpinching. Okay. And then I'm going to use a magnet. So, and that goes down, and this way goes up, which is correct. The south-seeking pole, you would expect a strong response, and the north-seeking pole you'd expect a weak response. These checks are from health kinesiology. They're standard health kinesiology checks. Having done the Thymus Tap, you now need to check if the person's energy system is balanced. For all of these checks, you have the palm over the navel. The first thing to do is test any muscle in the clear. You're expecting a strong response. Then, pinch in the belly of any muscle and test another muscle, and this time you'd expect a weak or unlocked response. Unpinch in the belly of the same muscle and test an indicator muscle. This time you're looking for a strong or locked response. Next, the client says no, and you test the indicator muscle again, and this time you're expecting a weak, unlocked response. Then the client says yes, and this time you should get a strong or locked response. Place the north-seeking pole of a magnet on the belly of any muscle and test the indicator muscle. This time you're looking for a weak or unlocked response. Finally, place the south-seeking pole of a magnet on the belly of any muscle and test the indicator muscle. This time you'd expect a strong or locked response. You can use other pre-checks as well, or instead of, if you want to.
So would you have to use a magnet?
The health kinesiology checks check different aspects of balance. So by using a verbal one, something physical and a magnet, you're getting at different aspects of balance, so checking they're all okay. So I recommend that. But on the other hand, if you don't have, you may have other pre-checks that you use. And so I know people who who don't have the magnet and do their own pre-checks and find that the system works fine. So I'm just showing you what I would use, but you can use other pre-checks. I know sometimes people like to check, for example, for hydration. And so that's fine. You can run those pre-checks as well, or instead of.
Can you tell me why you put the hand on the navel?
Okay, again, that comes from health kinesiology. And by putting the palm of the hand, the middle of the palm of the hand over the navel, you're plugging in to all the acupuncture meridians. So what you do, rather than just using this arm, this muscle test, which relates to one acupuncture meridian, you're actually, when you do that, you're actually checking all the different meridians. Okay?
So with the magnet, could you use a fridge magnet? Could you use any magnet?
Another good question. The magnets I use are not the normal fridge magnets. The normal fridge magnets, or the ones, for example, if you remember from school, then the poles were at the ends. So you have a north pole and a south pole at the ends, right? These actually, it's the flat side where the pole is. So they're easier to use apart from anything else. Otherwise, you've got to sort of balance it like this. So a bit depends. And the fridge magnets, I think, are alternating north and south poles all the way along. So you couldn't use an ordinary fridge magnet.
Right. Okay.
In a sense, the more pre-tests you use, the more certain you can be that the energy system is balanced. On the other hand, you don't want to spend your whole session doing pre-tests and then, time's up and you say, oh, right, well, we've got you balanced, but we don't have time to do anything. I'm going to start with food because food is possibly the simplest way to apply the energy mismatch technique, but as I said earlier, we will then expand it in some quite amazing and mind-blowing ways. I will talk later about how you decide what to test, because obviously as we go on you'll see there's just what you can test is endless.
Do you encourage them to bring along little sachets of X, Y and Z?
Well, actually, that's an interesting question. When I first started working, I used to ask people to bring things along. And I'd give them, when they made the appointment, I would give them a list of things to bring. And the number of people who didn't bring what I asked was, I would guess about 50% of people didn't bring what I asked. And quite a lot of people would turn up saying, oh, I forgot till the last minute that you wanted me to bring something, and I only thought about it in the car, but I've got a ham sandwich and a packet of mints. Is that any good? And it severely limited, what I could do in the session if that's what they brought with them. It also says things about what people their diet was, but it would really limit the session. So the kits that I'm going to show you, the test kits, I developed those, the first one, for my own use because people didn't bring what I wanted them to bring. So I developed a food test kit, which later on became Food A test kit, and then other practitioners saw it, liked the kit, and said, oh, where did you get that from? So I said, well, I made it and you could make one too. And nobody ever got round to it. So then other practitioners started to ask me if I would make one for them, and they would pay me for it. And that's how my whole test kit business started, completely by accident. First of all, by meeting my own need as a practitioner, and then by other practitioners coming to me and saying, will you make me one? And then obviously from that, I started with that one Food A. We've now got Food A to Food F. So we've got, it's grown a lot since then. I'm going to do the simplest scenario first of all, where the client says to you, I think I might be allergic or sensitive or intolerant to X, whatever X happens to be. Could you could you check for me? Okay. So, Anna, what sort of things do you think you have problems with or know you have problems with?
I know that I react to dairy, particularly milk.
Particularly milk. Yeah. All right. So Anna thinks she might or knows. You know? Yeah, she knows. She's got a problem with milk. All right? So I'm just going to test to confirm that. Sometimes people get it wrong. I once had a client who was convinced he was allergic to peanuts. Peanuts is a common allergy, so that could have been right. And I tested him and I said, you're not allergic to peanuts. Oh, yes, I am. So I retested. No, you're not. Oh, yes, I am. So I retested. No, you're definitely not. You must be mistaken. And then I had the inspiration. I said, when do you eat peanuts? And he said, when I'm in the pub. And I said, what do you drink? And he said, beer. So I said, okay, I think we should test some other things. And of course, he was actually allergic to hops, which is in the beer. And it wasn't the peanuts at all. And he was like, oh, damn, no. He really wanted it to be the peanuts. So sometimes people get it wrong. Sometimes people have read a book and the book says that everybody who has eczema is allergic to cow's milk, for instance. There's lots of books around that say that sort of thing. So I've got eczema, therefore I must be allergic to cow's milk. If the client says I'm allergic to something and you did the testing and you find they're not, don't assume your testing's wrong and the client's right. There's two steps to what we're going to do today. The first one is deciding whether or not the body recognises something properly. In this case, and in food terms, that means whether or not they're allergic sensitive to it, right? And then there's the correcting procedure. But we don't do the correcting procedure unless the energy system wants it. So you could have a situation here, for example, where we could get, okay, her body is miscategorizing milk, so therefore she's allergic sensitive to it, but for some reason or other it doesn't want it correcting now. So then you confirm to the client, yes, you're right, you do have a problem, you need to avoid it, you're quite right avoiding it. Yeah? Unfortunately, we can't correct it now. You might be able to correct it in a month or 2 months, particularly if you do other work, then you might be able to correct it. Yeah? Does that make sense? Yeah? Good. Okay. So Anna has been waiting here very patiently, and I need to test. The Energy Mismatch test point is triple warmer 21. Triple warmer 21 is in front of the ear. But first of all, I want to test it in the clear to make sure it tests strong. Anybody can hold the triple warmer 21. Either she can or I can. It is just in front of the ear. The easiest way to make sure you're covering it is just to lay the whole finger in front of the ear. So I'm going to do that on her, and then I'm just going to test. And we should get a strong response. In her case, we have. Just put your arm down again. If we hadn't, then I would then tap both triple warmer 21s on the side. So I'd just tap here and then recheck it. All right. In her case, I don't need to, and my experience is that you don't need to do it very often, but occasionally you will need to.
So why are we doing that?
The triple warmer 21 is the test point. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the substance that we want to test on the body. And then we're going to hold the triple warmer 21 point, and we're going to test to see if we get a strong response.
Well, that's what you mean by testing it in the clear, that it's working.
Well, first, this testing in the clear is to make sure that that point is strong.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
If you're testing a lot of different things, it's important not to hold triple warmer 21 all the time, because the point can fatigue. And if you keep holding it and then on the client, and then you're testing, the point could get really weak, and then suddenly you're getting, there's all this stuff that you've become that you're sensitive to. So if in doubt, if you're testing lots of stuff every so often, if you're suddenly getting a lot of things that appear to be testing the muscles unlocking, then what you need to do is test triple warmer 21 in the clear again. Yeah, just to make sure it's okay. So test it in the clear, should test, the muscle should lock, test strong. If it doesn't, tap both triple warmer 21s and only hold the triple warmer 21 while you're actually doing the muscle testing. So you put the substance on the body, hold triple warmer 21 and test the muscle at the same time. Okay? So we're going to test the cow's milk. So we take the vial and put it on CV6, which is 2 finger widths below the navel, right? CV6, central vessel 6. If you were using a bottle of milk or something like that, then you could get her to hold it rather than try and balance it on the person. And I would strongly recommend you test through glass. You tend to get much more, for some people you get much more accurate results if you test through glass rather than through plastic. So if you've got milk in a plastic container, decant it into glass if you're using it. All right, so that's on CV6.
Can I just ask about the fingers? Is it your fingers? Is it the client's fingers?
Oh, right, yes. So it's 2 finger widths below the navel, and it's her finger widths. You don't have to be absolutely 100% precise. I assume her finger widths are about the same as mine. If it was a small baby, if it was a big man, then I would actually maybe want to use their finger widths, or at least have a look at them before I did it. But it's fortunately you don't have to be pinpoint precise, but two finger widths on the midline. Okay, I'm actually going to get her to hold it because often she's got jeans on, and one of the things about jeans is they've got that really thick seam there with the zip and things, and they tend to roll off sideways. So I'm just going to get her to hold that. Okay, and I'm now going to hold triple warmer 21, so that's by the side of the ear, and test. And that's testing the muscles unlocking, testing weak, whatever phrase you want to use. So that's saying that the body doesn't recognise it correctly. And in food terms, that means she's allergic or sensitive to it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is lay a finger down by the side of the ear. Any finger will do, yeah? Or it could be her finger as well. In general, I use my own, because by the time you've explained to people, put your finger there and this is where I want it to go, and then between testing you're saying, oh, take your hand away, put your hand back, take your hand away, put your hand back. It's easier and quicker to do it yourself. All right, so I would generally do it on this side, though obviously I can just to demonstrate, hold it like that. All right, so the arm tested weak. So that means that the energy system isn't recognising milk correctly. She is correct in that, in her assumption. So now we're going to test for energy mismatch. First of all, you test 1 triple warmer 21 in the clear. It should test locked. Then you place the substance or the vial, the energy pattern you want to test on CV6. If the indicator muscle tests weak, this means that the body does not recognise the energy pattern of the substance. We now want to know whether we can correct the problem or not. All right, because in a sense we're no further forward as far as Anna's concerned. Anna already knew she had a problem with milk, and all I'm saying is you're right. So big deal. One of the great things about the energy mismatch is you can correct things. But you only correct them if you have energy permission to do it. The other thing is that the tapping technique, which I'm going to teach you, doesn't work for everything. So there's 2 questions really we need to ask. The first one is, will the tapping technique work? Yes or no? Yeah, it either will or it won't. And the second one is, do we have energy permission to actually do the correcting procedure? For some reason or other, her body might not want it corrected right now. And there could be all sorts of reasons for that. And it's not absolute. It doesn't mean it's never right. It means it's just not right at the moment. Yeah. So, you know, a week later you could test again and it might actually be right for her to have it corrected then.
But if the person says, I'm giving permission to go ahead and do it, isn't that enough?
No.
Why not?
I mean, in a sense, she's given permission because she's come to see me as a client and she says, I've got this milk allergy and it's driving me mad avoiding it and I'm fed up with it and I get milk when I don't realise I'm getting it and it makes me ill or whatever. So I have an intellectual permission from her. But I think as therapists, we know that sometimes there's an inner wisdom, for want of a better expression, that knows something else and has some insider knowledge that maybe the intellect doesn't have about what's right and wrong for that person. So that's what I mean by getting energy permission. It's getting that insider knowledge, that inner wisdom knowledge of whether it's the right thing to do or not. And I would say to you categorically, do not proceed unless you get that. It's really, really important. So the first thing I'm going to ask though is, will it work? Will the tapping work, right? And the way we do that is we use both heart ones. Heart 1 is in the armpit. So first of all, I'm going to test those in the clear. So can you just hold both armpits? You can either do it like that or crossways. So it's finger right in your armpit. Yes? Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Now I don't have an arm to test. So you could do the quads. But for some older people, that's quite a hard muscle to use continuously. So I would often actually get her to hold one heart 1 and I hold the other one. And then I've got one arm, her arm, and we can test. All right. Some people don't like you holding their armpits, either because their armpits are very sweaty and they're embarrassed by that, or because they're just horrendously ticklish, in which case then you would use the quads for testing. Yeah. But assuming she doesn't mind me holding one of her hearts. Which one should I do? I'll do this one. Okay. So I'm going to get my finger into her heart. 1. Funny things we do in our practices. Okay, and now I'm going to apply gentle pressure. So what I'm doing is just testing the heart 1s in the clear. And the arm tests strong. Okay? If it didn't test strong in the clear, you would then tap both heart 1s, just like if triple warmer 21 doesn't test stronger in the clear, you tap both triple 121s. All right, so here you tap both heart wands. That's quite fun to do, particularly if people are ticklish. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to put the milk back on CV6. See if we can get this to balance. Yes, okay. So the milk's gone back on CV6. We're going to hold both heart wands and the arm goes down. That means the tapping technique will work. Okay, so substance on CV6, which is 2 finger widths below the navel. We're holding both heart wands. Arm goes down, so it means the tapping technique will work. The correcting tapping technique will work. Yep. So we now need to ask, do we have energy permission for it to proceed? There may be some reason why her body, her energy system doesn't want it, her inner wisdom doesn't want us to correct this right now. And to do that, we're going to ask a verbal question. The rule of thumb for verbal questions is that you don't have the substance on the body, you don't hold any points, you just ask the question. And a locked response means yes, an unlocked response means no. So I'm going to ask the question, do we have energy permission to correct this cow's milk energy mismatch right now? All right? And I add right now because if you say, do we have energy permission to correct it, what's the answer? If it's, well, not today, but tomorrow's okay. Because the body can only say yes or no. So it's right now. So do we have energy permission to correct this cow's milk energy mismatch right now? And we've got a strong response, a locked response, so that means yes. So we want to know if we can correct the energy mismatch problem. So first of all, we put the substance on CV6, hold both heart wands in the client's armpits and test the indicator muscle. A weak response or an unlocked response tells you that the tapping procedure will work. Next ask, do we have energy permission to correct the energy mismatch problem for this substance right now? Remember, you don't have the substance on the body and you don't hold any points when you ask this question. A strong response means yes. So now we can go on to the tapping because we've got the tapping will work and we have energy permission to do it as well. So we're now going to do the tapping, and for that I need you to take your shoes off, please. All right, so we have energy permission to proceed. So now we're going to do the tapping. And so what we will do, we'll put the substance back on CV6. Don't forget that, because remember you've just done the do we have energy permission and you've taken it off. If you leave it off and start tapping, the body doesn't have a clue what it's supposed to be fixing. So you need to put the substance back. And then what we're going to do is we're going to tap the beginning and end points of the acupuncture meridians, bladder, kidney, stomach and spleen. You can tap them in any order.
Can I ask you why those 4?
And again, the answer is I don't know.
Oh.
I know it works, which is really the important thing. As I said earlier on, this technique comes from health kinesiology, which Jimmy Scott developed. And he did a lot of testing to find out which were the right points to use and came up with bladder, kidney, stomach, spleen. And that applies, it's not just, I mean, when we talk about stomach, you think, oh, yeah, that makes sense for foods. But in fact, it's regardless of what the substance is on CV6, you will always be using bladder, kidney, stomach, spleen. You can do the tapping in any order. You can be the sole person tapping, you can get the client to tap as well, a third person can join in, it's up to you. I know some practitioners don't like the idea of doing them out of sequence, as they've been taught in their particular branch of kinesiology. And if that really bothers you, then do them in sequence. But I find it doesn't matter if you do them out of sequence. So I would do the bladder and the stomach, kidney, spleen, and then go to the feet and do those. Right, so I do all the upper body and then the lower body. If I'm getting the client to help, and with someone like Anna, there's no reason why you wouldn't want them to help if they're happy to do that. You get them to help in the tapping. So she could tap the top half of the body while I tap the bottom half of the body. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. So you tap very lightly for about 30 seconds each point. As I say, in any order. And when you've tapped them all, we will recheck that it's now tested okay. So if you haven't, don't worry about, am I tapping this for long enough? Because if you haven't, when you recheck, the rechecking will tell you that you haven't done it for long enough and you will have to do it for longer. Right. So I'm going to get Anna to tap the bladder points to begin with, which are here. So if you'd just like to tap just briefly just here. Okay, and I'll tell you when to stop. So Anna's going to tap there, and I'm going to tap either side of the feet on the little toe. So it's lateral little toe for those of you like the more scientific terminology. So remember, you've got the milk on CV6. If you don't have the thing there, the body doesn't know what it's supposed to be sorting out.
I'm interested that you've both got different rhythms. I always thought it had to be the same rhythm.
I've never found it mattered, and I've done thousands of people. So
it's interesting you should say that, because I was taught that you should do the end and the beginning at the same time as well.
yes, I've never found it matters.
Thank you, that's wonderful. Good news, thank you.
I think, sometimes people make it more complicated than it needs to be. So I think the problem is that if you believe these things are important, then they become important because subtle energy is very malleable. So if your belief system is that you have to do these in that order, then it's important, is what I would say. Okay, so we've done beginning and end of the bladder meridian. So now we're going to do stomach, which is just below, it's on your eye socket there. If you just feel along your eye socket, there's a little, can you feel a little, like a little notch? Yeah? And I'd use 2 fingers, and that way you make sure you get it. If you do 1, you've got to be much more accurate. Using 2, you're going to cover the spot if you're just doing that. Particularly if you're getting the client to help, giving them 2 fingers or even 3 sometimes means you cover that spot. Okay? So she's now tapping the stomach meridian. I'm going to do kidney just to show that this is possible.
Brilliant.
So the kidney spot is on the bottom of the balls of the feet. You can tap this way, which is really awkward, or better still, I find, is to do it this way. And again, I'm using 2 or 3 fingers because that way you cover the kidney 1 spot. Some people yawn or have stomach gurgles, or all sorts of things happen when the energy starts to move. Because remember, what we're doing is correcting it on an energetic level. Okay? And then it filters through to the physical body. So, all right. So we've now done, she's done bladder and stomach. I've done bladder and kidney. All right. Anna's now going to do the kidney. Can I just have a look where we are here? Yeah. So you're just there. Either side, yeah? Okay, right here. So I'm going to do spleen, because I can. So you're tapping, it shouldn't hurt you. It doesn't hurt you, does it?
No, not at all.
It shouldn't hurt, it shouldn't be painful or sore in any way. Now this is taking longer than it would take me normally, because I'm all, we're talking as well, but I mean, you can do this. It's 30 seconds each point, so roughly. So you're talking about, if she's doing the top and I'm doing the bottom, we're doing 4 points each, 4 sets of points each. So it's a 2-minute procedure. So it's really, really fast. Final one for you is the spleen, which is level with the nipple, but on the sides. So you can either do it like that, if that's easiest, or crossed over, whichever's easiest. You find it easiest that way? Yeah. Different people find it easier in different ways. And I'm going to do the stomach, which is, if I can feel your toes, there we go, is lateral second toe. So you're going to tap the beginning and end points of the bladder meridian, the kidney meridian, the stomach meridian and the spleen meridian on both sides of the body. So bladder 1, the points are beside the nose at the inner corner of the eye. The bladder 67 points are near the lateral corner of the little toe at the base of the nail. Kidney 1 is the centre of the ball of the foot. Kidney 27 is just below the clavicle-sternum junction. Stomach 1 is the eye socket bone just below the centre of the eye. Stomach 45 is near the lateral corner of the second toenail. Spleen 1 is near the medial corner of the big toenail. Spleen 21 is the sides of the torso, straight down from the armpit and level with the nipples. Okay, so I think we've done it for long enough, but I need to be certain. So I'm going to check in two ways. The first way is holding the triple warmer 21 point, which is beside the ear. Remember, that's the test for whether or not the body recognises it properly. And when we tested the triple warmer 21 point before with the milk on CV6, her arm went down. Okay, so we're going to check that again. So I'm holding triple warmer 21 and testing, and it tests strong. Now, it might if it tested weak, that means you need to do more tapping. And in general, I'd just do the whole thing again. It's only going to take you, rather than trying to work out which, is it only one that needs more than two, some more or what, just do the whole thing again because it doesn't take that long. But I'm also going to ask a verbal question to make sure. And again, a locked muscle means yes. So I'm going to ask, is this completely and robustly done? And I like to use the word robustly because by that I mean, okay, it may be done for now, but, you know, in a week's time, is it all going to sort of fade away somehow? We want this to be permanent. So when I'm saying, is this completely and robustly done, meaning, you know, is this going to be absolutely good for her for the foreseeable future? So is this completely and robustly done? Yes. Okay. So we've corrected her milk allergy. You'll have to let me know how you get on.
Yeah.
I always like people to let me know because obviously, you know, things happen on the couch, but the real test of it is what happens when people go out and about and do things. My own experience, as I say, is you get amazing results. Amazing results. You will just... It's just wonderful for people to come back and say, you know, I can eat this stuff or be exposed to this stuff and it is no longer a problem.
So would you ask how long before she can have some milk?
I would use some verbal questioning to ask that. Not everybody is happy using verbal questioning. If you don't want to use verbal questioning, then you'll have to find another way of doing it, or else you'll just have to say to people, you know, you'll have to have a standard thing, which is like, oh, don't have any for a month and then try a bit or something like that. But actually, I think it's much better to ask. So I'll just do a little bit of verbal questioning here. Okay, so could Anna drink milk straight away without any problem, right now? The answer is no. Okay. So for the best that we can do for her, should she wait at least a week? Yes. At least 2 weeks? Yes. At least 3 weeks? No. Okay, so somewhere between 2 and 3 weeks. If this was a real client situation, I would check it, you know, get a bit more detailed than that. But I think I don't want to do a verbal questioning session. I've written a verbal questioning book on verbal questioning skills for kinesiologists and dowsers. So if you're interested in learning more about that aspect of things, then I suggest you get that book.
By correcting a milk allergy, would Anna then be better off in her reactions to things like cheese, for instance?
She might be, or it could be you would need to do cheese separately. So one of the things you could now do is test cheese we didn't test cheese before, but I mean, we could have tested milk and cheese and da 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 da. But I like to keep things as simple as possible. I had a really good example of that once. I had a zookeeper who came to see me who had allergic rhinitis, you know, like sort of hay fever type symptoms all year. And I asked him what he did, and he said, I'm a zookeeper. And he said, I'm in charge of the birds. And he said, I use all these different bird feeds, and we have all this different bedding material and things. And I said, well, my rule of thumb is always that we keep it simple. So we're going to start by testing you on common foods. And then, you know, if that doesn't work, we can go on and look at all these complex things. And we never needed to test him on the animal feeds and things, because we got his food sensitivities corrected and he was fine. So we never needed to do it. So I always believe in keeping things as simple as possible. But in this situation, yeah, I mean, because you've said all dairy, didn't you? Mm. Okay, so I would test cheese, butter and things as well. Yeah.
Could it be possible for somebody not to have a peanut allergy, but to have a peanut allergy when combined with, say, beer? That a combination could produce that?
I think that's usually, and it's a good question, usually when that happens, it's actually intolerance, rather than what we're dealing with here with the energy mismatch is an allergy sensitivity, which means that whatever the quantity, you would react to it.
Yes.
Right? Tolerance problems are where you could tolerate a certain amount. It could be quite a minuscule amount, but you can tolerate a certain amount, but no more. Right? And sometimes, for instance, myself, I'm okay on milk, I'm okay on oranges, but if I have the two together as milk and oranges, so, you know, if I had a drink of milk and then a drink of orange juice, that would really upset my stomach, and I'd feel, you know, I don't have a good tolerance for the two together. But it's not an allergic reaction, it's a tolerance reaction.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Yes.
And we're not really going to cover tolerance at all today. One of the things you find, if you do if people are allergic to something or sensitive to it, you usually start, that effectively means they've got a tolerance of 0. And after you've done straight after the energy mismatch, their tolerance may still be 0. Because it's been corrected at an energy level, but it may take a while before that progresses through to the physical body. So you need to be somewhat careful. Somebody might have to wait a week or 2 weeks before they can take it. I had a guy who had anaphylactic shock with flatfish, surprisingly, because it's usually, he was fine on shellfish, but not on flatfish like plaice and things like that. And he had been avoiding it for a long time, and but every so often, you know, he'd eat in a restaurant and he'd get a very small amount of fish stock in his whatever he was eating or something, and his throat would close up and he'd get in a really bad state. So he came to me, and we did this and some other stuff as well. And I did some testing using verbal questioning, and I got that he shouldn't actually eat it for 6 months, that his body was going to take that long before he would have any tolerance at all. And then it was like half a teaspoon. And then it took about 7 months, I think, before he was at being able to eat a normal portion. And I saw him several times over the next few years, and he would say, I can go out for a meal and I can have, you know, I can order a place and eat it, and it's no problem at all. Now, I don't think normally people need to wait 6 months. I think that is a real exception. And often a week, 2 weeks is fine, and then people can start eating or drinking that thing again. Okay.
If, for instance, a client has a condition like colitis, given that they test positive at the end of an energy mismatch balance, would that mean that they would then react in a less severe way as they would have beforehand? I mean, would it be appropriate for them to have something like milk, for instance?
Well, we've tested when they could start to have some milk again. because this is a demonstration, I've only gone as far as in 2 to 3 weeks, yeah, that she can start to introduce milk into her diet again. If there was some reason why it wasn't appropriate, for some other reason other than allergy and sensitivity, then let me give you another example, because with colitis, sometimes people colitis, because of the inflammation, if you eat, say, wholemeal bread, then the bran in the bread can actually just like scrub the digestive tract. And as the digestive tract's already very inflamed, then having something scrubbing it as it goes down is actually going to cause pain, discomfort, further inflammation. That is not an allergic sensitive reaction. It's a physical reaction between the bran and the bowel wall. So say we'd been doing bread, and she's just for demonstration purposes, Anna is allergic to wheat and she has colitis. Yeah. So we do the tapping, fix it, shows us being fixed. Now it may not be appropriate for her to have some because of, it may be appropriate for her, say, to have white bread rather than wholemeal bread, although generally I'm in favour of wholemeal bread, but it may be that white bread would be okay, wholemeal bread is not, because the white bread doesn't scrub the bowel walls in the same way. And that's where verbal questioning really comes in. But because then you can establish exactly how soon she could have it, how much she could have, and so on. Right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I've got a question about safety. So if I had a nut allergy, and if I put nut in my mouth, I'd have an extreme physical reaction. Putting some nut on CV6, would I experience the same sort of reaction?
I've never had a problem with that. But in general, if you're using test kits, and that's what I predominantly do, because it's much easier and quicker than using actual foods, then I don't think there's any problem whatsoever with it.
Right.
Okay.
So if you had somebody coming with something like diesel, if they had a reaction to diesel, okay, would it be better that it's in some sort of like test vial, so they can't smell it or interact with it? It's just neutral as possible.
Yes. And the other thing about the test vials as well is people don't know what you're testing. And you do get people who are convinced they're allergic to something. And, you know, if you say, they say, oh, every time I have apple, I get a terrible migraine, da-da-da-da-da. And so you say, oh, here we are, let's test this apple. And you put the apple on. The chances are they're not going to try and hold their arm up so much, because they're going to think, oh, well, I know my arm's going to unlock on that because it's an apple. And there's something to be said also for you as a practitioner sometimes not knowing what you're testing. Because sometimes it's, not always, but I think all practitioners have their own pet theories. And that I've had my own pet theories about this, that and the other. And if you then if you test a whole series of vials and you don't know what you're testing, then your pet theory is not going to influence the outcome. So I think, you know, vials are really good for all sorts of reasons. They're fast to test. You don't have to worry about spilling things. Because you're not putting it in the mouth, you don't have to worry about people cleaning out their mouth or being exposed to something that they're really, really sensitive to and could start reacting to. And things like diesel fumes or petrol, all that sort of thing. Yeah. So it's a really, really simple technique, as you can see. What you're going to do is you put the substance on CV6, test triple warmer 21. If it tests weak or the muscle unlocks, you then find out whether the tapping will work by using Heart 1. Ask the question, do you have energy permission to do the correction? You then tap the points, and then you retest afterwards to make sure it's worked. So far I've just shown you how to use it with foods, that one simple example of milk that we use for Anna. But you can also do it with pollens, dust, moulds. There's just an awful lot. You can collect things, you can collect flowers, you can collect household dust, you can collect mould off walls and things like that, and use those. That's all a bit haphazard, so I really recommend you using kits. And we have 2 pollens, dust and mould kits that you can use. There's also a chemical and inhalant kit that has things like house dust mite and things like that in it as well. And again, you're doing it in exactly the same way. Whether you use a substance that you put on CV6 or whether you use a vial that you're putting on CV6, it's exactly the same. So, and then you just go through the tapping procedure. The things that we inhale, we tend to assume, if you inhale them, they're going to actually give you things like allergic rhinitis, hay fever and so on. But they can also cause other problems. They can cause skin problems. And interestingly, I had a child of 8 or 9 who bedwet, but only in the summer. And she turned out to be allergic to pollens. And it was the pollens that were causing her to bedwet. That may seem somewhat strange, but actually when you inhale things, if you've got your mouth open at any time, because you're talking, because you're breathing through your mouth, then the pollens will actually go into your mouth as well. Or the diesel fumes or the petrol fumes or whatever is in the air will go into your mouth and will actually go into your digestive system. So don't just think of inhalants in terms of allergic sort of things. I mean, house dust mite is the classic for eczema. And a tip for that is that if people's symptoms are worse first thing in the morning, house dust mite is something I'd look at, because where the house dust mite is, the biggest concentrations of house dust mite are in your bed. And you're lying in the bed all night. So if people who wake up in the morning sneezing, itching, scratching, that sort of thing, it's often down to an allergic reaction, often to house dust mite. Could be washing powder or something else as well, but house dust mite is very common, and particular for eczema sufferers.
So if you've treated somebody for a pollen allergy and it emerges that they have to keep away from the pollen for a week, how do you cope with that one?
Well, we have to live in the real world, and if that pollen's out at that time, the person is not going to be able to avoid it completely. But what you would do is advise them to take sort of, for that week they might have to keep all their windows closed, for example, to keep the pollen from out of the house. They maybe don't go into the garden where that particular pollen is, and so on. You have to just do the best you can, because you can't avoid those things completely. In my experience, even though you can't avoid them completely, it still works. It seems like it's going to be an insurmountable problem, but when in practice it isn't. Okay, so we're expanding this concept, and I now want to think about heavy metals and nasty chemicals that are in the environment. We all know that mercury is bad for us. We all know that aluminium and things like this are bad for us. But the body may miscategorise some of these heavy metals. And remember, I said if it miscategorises something as harmful, it might say, come in. So if your body's miscategorising mercury, aluminium, cadmium, something like that, it's going to say, come in. So it's not going to try and get rid of it. What it's going to do is store it. And if it's storing it in the body, it can give you all sorts of symptoms. I once had a teenager came to see me, and she had severe epilepsy. She was on Epilim, but it wasn't completely controlling her epileptic fits. She was having small fits most days, and was in quite a terrible state. And one of the really important things we found for her was that she had high levels of cadmium. And the reason for that was because the body didn't recognise cadmium as something that it didn't want. And so by doing the energy mismatch, the body goes, oh, I've got all this cadmium stored around. I need to get rid of it. When you do energy mismatch on these sort of heavy metals, I always encourage clients to drink a lot afterwards to help that detox process. If you're dealing with something that's internal, then they need to get rid of it. There's chemicals in the environment. I mean, there's pesticides, there's food additives, there's all sorts of things that we're exposed to in our personal care products in all sorts of ways. I once had a baby of about 6 weeks, came to see me, my youngest client at that time, and she stayed asleep for the whole session. And she was brought to see me because she wasn't thriving. She was actually losing weight. And in a 6-week-old baby, that's really a really serious situation. She was being formula fed rather than breastfed, and Mum said, we've tried so many formulas. The nurses, the doctors, everybody suggested different formulas. We've tried all these different formulas, and she keeps being sick. We feed her and she's sick. And testing showed she was allergic to some of the chemicals in the tap water they were using to mix the feed. So it didn't matter which feed they used, because the tap water was always the same. And so what we did was we corrected that, and while it worked, because it wasn't an immediate thing, then during that period, my water, which was filtered, I gave them some of my water that they could use for the child, and I heard a few weeks later that she was thriving and putting on weight, and everybody was really relieved. So a really simple technique. That's one thing I would get people to bring, is their own tap water, because it can depend on the plumbing that's actually in that house. So even if you're testing your next door neighbour, I would get them to bring some tap water with them and check it out. People drink tap water, people clean their teeth with tap water and end up swallowing them some. So it's really important to do that. It's really important, remember, you're not testing whether these substances are good or bad. So the heavy metals, by definition, if something is a heavy metal, it's not good for us, it's not something we want. So it's really important that we're not testing whether it's good or bad for us, we're testing, does the body know that this is bad for it, that these heavy metals are bad for it? Yeah? If it doesn't know that, then it needs help in correcting it. Now, say you have, like this girl with cadmium, you do the tapping technique and her body now shows that that it understands that cadmium is harmful to it. That doesn't mean that you could have any amount of exposure to it. Cadmium is still a heavy metal, it's still bad for us, but if the body understands that it's bad for it, then it will do its best to detox and get rid of it, break it down, get rid of it. So therefore, it's less of a problem. If your body doesn't understand that cadmium is something that's bad for it and doesn't try to detox it, then it will keep storing it. So if your body doesn't understand that cadmium is bad for it, you will have toxic problems at a lower level of exposure than somebody where the system does understand that cadmium or whatever it is bad for it. Yeah? So I'm saying with mercury, if you fix mercury, you don't say to people, oh, now go and have a load of mercury fillings done, because mercury is still a toxic metal.
So you could also have a situation where somebody's spending lots of money on lots of supplements, which are doing it no good because the body doesn't know what to do with it.
That's right.
That's the next topic. Okay.
And that's what I was going to explain about next. Okay, so moving on from toxic metals to nutritional minerals, we have things like calcium, nutritional, copper, sometimes nutritional, sometimes not, depending on the levels. There's all sorts of things like that. There's all the vitamins and the minerals that are in our food or we take in supplements. It's things like amino acids. Okay. So what happens if you put a vitamin or a mineral on CV6, test triple warmer 21, and the arm unlocks? So that's telling you that the body doesn't recognise that thing, whatever it is on CV6, doesn't know what to do with it. In the case of a nutritional mineral, it may be trying to excrete it. So you may actually have an adequate amount in your diet, but the body may be showing deficiency symptoms because it's not absorbing it. Right? Another possibility is that the body is absorbing it but storing it inappropriately. I had a really good example of this. I tested calcium on a client. She had osteoarthritis. The energy mismatch technique is superb for people with osteoarthritis. And I would in particular, I mean, you need to test whatever it is, but very often the minerals that really come up are calcium, silica, and sodium. Right? Those are the three minerals that very often come up, but there could be other things. Anyway, she had osteoarthritis, a lot of pain in her joints, and she tested as having the energy mismatch on calcium. And I was explaining to her about how this meant that her body wasn't absorbing calcium properly. But I said, what you can end up with is deficiency in excess. And I think that's what you've probably got. And I said to her, one of the signs of calcium deficiency is very brittle nails. And she said, yes, I have those. And I listed some other things, and she said, yes, I have those. I have that, I have that. Oh yeah, I've got that. And she hadn't told me these at the beginning of the session. And then I said to her, I think what's happening is not that your body's excreting the calcium, but it's actually putting it into your joints, and that's what's causing the pain. So you've got signs of deficiency, which are the brittle nails, and you've got signs of excess, which is the painful joints. So I said, what we need to do is get the calcium out the joints and into your nails where it belongs. And the energy mismatch will do this. I said, I don't want you taking calcium, because if you take calcium, if you take enough calcium as a supplement, you could actually end up with really good nails, because the more you put in, some of it will get through into your nails. So I said, you could end up with wonderful nails. You say, I'm taking this calcium supplement and my nails look fantastic. On the other hand, there's a very good chance if you did that before you fix the energy mismatch, that along with very good nails, you'd also have your arthritis really bad. Because some of the calcium wouldn't get into the nails, it would get deposited in the joints. So by using the energy mismatch, that very, very simple technique that I showed you with Anna for the milk, exactly the same thing, but instead of using the milk vial, using the calcium vial for her, she went away and she started, her body started removing the calcium from the joints very slowly over a period of time, and she ended up with really good nails. And an interesting thing, she asked me, why did that happen? Now, Brian asked this question earlier, why do people get this energy mismatch? And I said to her, well, I don't know, sometimes it's inherited. And she said, well, it's actually really interesting. She said, my mum's just come out of hospital where she's been for tests, and they've said she has abnormal calcification around the heart. So I said, it looks like you've inherited it. And in your mother's case, the calcium, you've inherited the problem, but the body's solution, bad solution to this, is different in both cases. In your mother's case, it's put the calcium around the heart. In your case, it's put the calcium into your joints. So you've got actually the same inherited, I guess it's probably inherited. I never actually did work with the mother, sadly, because I would have liked to have really checked that, but she lived a long way away and she was quite old. But there's different examples of the same, so it isn't always that the calcium gets put in the joints. Something else could happen with it. But by actually adjusting, by doing the energy mismatch, then the body is able to absorb what it needs to absorb and remove what it doesn't need to have. Once when I was teaching this workshop, I mentioned that white spots on your nails can be a sign of a zinc deficiency. And when the participants came to practice, one of them, who had white spots on her nails, said to her partner, I want you to check me on zinc. Sure enough, the muscle unlocked when they did the triple woman 21 test, so they did the tapping. I wasn't aware of this, but I saw this woman 3 months later at a conference, and she walked up to me and went, "Look," sort of putting her hands in my face, and I said, "What?" And then she said, "I did your Energy Mismatch workshop," and she said, "Look at my nails." She said, "The bottom half, there's no white spots, and the top half there are white spots." And she said, "That's obviously, since I did the Energy Mismatch technique, my nails are now growing like they should do." She said, "I'd really like to keep this because it'd be so good to show to clients." But of course, you know, obviously it went on growing out, and she eventually ended up with no white spots. I used to have a lot of white spots on my nails, did the zinc thing, fine. So, you know, it's a good indicator that the stuff works. It's such a simple technique, but it works. And okay, you may say, well, so what? You know, if you stopped having white spots on your nails, it's no big deal. But zinc is one of the most important minerals in the body. So if it's not doing it, if it's not using it appropriately, and white spots on your nails are only one example of that, then getting that right puts those right, but also does all sorts of other things for you as well.
Is it possible to do the technique on yourself?
Yes. If you're happy self-testing, you can do it on yourself, yeah.
What about wriggly babies and children?
Wriggly babies and children I have done, usually using a surrogate. I once did a dog, and this was before I knew about surrogate testing, and I don't like dogs very much, and it was this big German shepherd with big teeth, and I was tapping below its eyes and here, and it was it's very at the end I had to go and have a shower because I was absolutely covered. I was so sweaty because I was so frightened doing its paws. Now I would surrogate the dog, but I didn't know about surrogate testing when I did that. So, but you can do yourself, yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's slightly more difficult, and it's more difficult maybe to be objective, and that's why maybe the test kits are good, because then you can test things without knowing what you're testing, but you can certainly do it on yourself, yeah. So, expanding further still, as well as inhaling pollens, dust and moulds and all that sort of thing, we also encounter bacteria, viruses, parasites, and these can have a profound effect on us. If your body recognises a particular bacterial virus, then it knows how to deal with it. And if it knows how to deal with it, you either don't get the infection, or you can get a very mild version of an infection. During workshops, sometimes people come to me with a state of horror and say, "I've just tested somebody and they've shown up on HIV. What should I do? What should I tell them?" And I always say it doesn't mean that the person has HIV, and this applies to all bacteria and virus, parasites and so on. It doesn't mean they have it. What it means is that they are susceptible to it. So the body may say, this person is so susceptible to HIV, right? Because the body doesn't, it's not being recognised, so they're going to, you know, they will get it if they encounter it, and they will be really ill and die. That we need to protect them against it. So that's why it could come up. So remember, it doesn't mean the person has that or has indeed ever been exposed to it. But obviously the more common use is where somebody has been exposed to it. There's lots of interesting stuff about bacteria and virus. We think about them in terms of maybe coughs and colds and people having fevers and things like that. And of course they are relevant. But bacteria and viruses can also play a really important part in all sorts of other illnesses. There's some recent research that a bacteria that causes acne also causes lower back pain. Now, you wouldn't think that, would you? And the person doesn't necessarily have to have acne as well, but if it gets in the lower back and the inflammation actually can lead to lower back pain. We could do the energy mismatch on it. The herpes simplex has been linked to dementia. You know, again, somebody might come up with herpes simplex who hasn't had herpes, But it may be like, if they get it, then they're more likely to get dementia, so we need to stop that in its tracks. I have had huge success with people with cold sores using the energy mismatch technique. Some people who've had a lot, repeated bouts of cold sores, you test the herpes simplex virus. Usually you get an unlock response. Providing you get permission, you do the tapping, you will reduce dramatically, if not completely, the instance of them getting cold sores. People love you for helping to get rid of cold sores because they are so painful. Occasionally you'll get people where it doesn't solve it completely, but it will certainly reduce dramatically. And for most people I've treated, no further cold sores. So it's well worth doing. I had a client who had really bad psoriasis, which she got after she had a strep throat infection. We did this energy mismatch work on the strep throat, on the strep bacteria. And I did a bit of other work. Her psoriasis completely disappeared. And she was a complete skeptic. She'd been dragged along by her mother under great protest. So there was definitely, absolutely no placebo effect at all. It was whatever the opposite of placebo is, that's what was going on with her. I mean, that was a really impressive result. And the big important thing of that was doing energy mismatch on one of the strep bacteria.
Have you ever come across cases where the body's attacking the healthy, positive bacteria it needs? Could that happen?
Well, there's the balance in the gut, and so you can get, for example, like Candida albicans overgrowth, and that's often because the body doesn't recognise the Candida albicans as the as being something that it doesn't, that it needs to keep under control, and then by doing the energy mismatch, you sort that out. Yeah.
Well, what I meant, when you take antibiotics and it kills off the good bacteria in the gut. Yes. Can you also have situations where the body's going, I don't recognise you, I'm attacking you? Yes,
absolutely. And one of the things I've got in the bacteria test kits, there are some bacteria which are reckoned to be harmless. I mean, there are obviously some that are beneficial, but there's quite a lot that are believed to be harmless. Now, obviously, if the body decides these harmless bacteria that it should effectively be ignoring are harmful, and it starts attacking them, then that can give you all sorts of health problems. But yeah, there are beneficial bacteria. There are,
and the body can forget.
And again, the body's somehow got it in its mind. I was going to say, which isn't. But the energy system is believing that it's harmful when it's either beneficial or harmless. If it believes it's harmful, it will be trying to destroy it. Yeah? Does that answer your question?
It does.
Yeah, good. People always at some point ask about vaccinations. We have a vaccination kit. If people have already been vaccinated and are having an adverse reaction to the vaccination, then using the vaccination kit is really good. You'd again check the energy mismatch, and same procedure as for everything else. If people are going to be vaccinated, and this is before they're vaccinated, then I would check both the bacteria and the virus, whatever it happens to be that they're being vaccinated against, and the vaccination itself. That's before they're vaccinated. If the person is not going to be vaccinated at all, and in a lot of countries, as practitioners, we're not legally allowed to advise or not advise that. But if somebody comes to you and says, I'm not going to have my child vaccinated, then I would suggest you check not the vaccination, but the bacteria or viruses that are the basis of the vaccination, and check all of them. Check for energy mismatch and correct any, providing you get energy permission, correct any that need correcting.
And the reason for that would be?
Well, because if the body doesn't recognise the bacteria, then they're more likely to, or the virus, then they're more likely to catch it, they're more likely to have an adverse reaction to it. And checking the vaccination vial for somebody who's not going to be vaccinated, they're not exposed to the vaccination, they're exposed to the bacterial or virus.
So
right?
if the virus and bacteria comes along, their body will be more able to recognise it, and if they do have a reaction, it'll be a much smaller,
Yes.
you hope.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
People can also react to drugs, both recreational drugs and standard medicine. Sometimes it's very useful to test the drugs that clients bring with them. In a lot of countries you can't legally say to people, stop taking this drug, but often I've found that clients who get a lot of side effects to their drugs, that if you do the energy mismatch procedure, if it's appropriate on the drug, then they stop getting the side effects. So this can be particularly useful for drugs that people really, really need to take at this stage of their health, their life, because you can actually counteract the effects, some of the nasty side effects that they have with them, and people really appreciate that. An interesting aspect of allergy is that people are often addicted to things that they like. So actually, going back to foods, one of the things you can say to people before you start testing it is, what do you really like? If I said to you, if you had to say, if I could only live on one thing, it would be X, what would that X be? If people answer you immediately, the chances are they're allergic to that thing. Some people also, in terms of, I get people who fill up the car, when they fill up the car, they're going all the time while they're filling it up. Now that actually is not a good, healthy reaction, because that stuff is not good for us. And it's usually a sign that the person's allergic to it. And allergy very often equals addiction, so they're actually getting their they're getting their hit from it. Of course, 2 miles down the road, the hit has gone, and they're now one aggressive driver because they're on the down, or 5 miles or whatever, 10 miles, 20 miles down the road. They're now turned into one aggressive driver because the hit they've had is gone, and they're now on a down. I sort of feel we ought to test everybody at gas or petrol stations and just check. Maybe it would reduce the number of road accidents there are. And one of the things you will find is that by correcting, using the energy mismatch, you can turn off that that addictive behaviour. So it can really help people. I've helped people who've been, I had one lady who was addicted to painkillers. She'd been on painkillers and she no longer needed the painkillers, but she couldn't come off them because she was addicted to them. The pain had gone, but she still had to take them because otherwise she got horrendous withdrawal symptoms that she didn't feel able to cope with. And so what I did was tested, energy mismatched, and we worked out a program for her to reduce it, and she came off them and was fine, and she said it was a really great help. And so if you've got people on recreational drugs that don't want to be on them, or people who are addicted to prescription drugs and want to come off, then this technique can work really well for them.
So I've got 2 questions.
Yeah.
First one, you do test kits, I believe, for electromagnetics and geopathics. So putting something like that on CV6, could that also help with somebody who's in a geopathic house or entrained to their television? Could you also use this technique in that way?
Yes. I mean, that's quite a specialist kit, but it's really useful for people who have problems with mobile phones, televisions, all this sort of stuff, and can help break that addictive cycle that is often there.
So addiction to computer games and that sort of thing?
That may help, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so as well as things outside the body, this stuff inside the body, we've also already talked about bacteria inside the body, particularly harmless bacteria that are meant to be there. But as well as that, we've got other things inside our body. We've got digestive enzymes, there's hormones, there's neurotransmitters and so on. What happens if the body doesn't recognise one of those? This may seem like a really unusual situation, but in my experience, in my practice, it's really, really common that people don't recognise a particular hormone, bacteria, or hormone, body biochemical, often quite a lot of them. And you can really transform people's lives. I've had people with thyroid problems that I've worked with and really helped so that they've been able to reduce the amount of thyroxine they're taking. And what you do is exactly the same as we did for that milk vial right at the beginning. You take a particular hormone, take a particular digestive enzyme, a neurotransmitter, whatever it happens to be, put it on CV6, check triple warmer 21. If the muscle unlocks, you check that you can and you're allowed to fix it, and you do the tapping and then check again afterwards. All right? So it's exactly the same situation. What sometimes seems to happen in the body is that it's almost like the right arm not knowing what the left arm's doing. It's like one bit of the body is busily pumping out this hormone, and another bit of the body is going, oh my God, look at that toxin, and it's destroying it. So you can have people where the physical body is producing enough of a particular hormone, a particular neurotransmitter, or whatever it happens to be, but they're actually showing symptoms of a deficiency of it because the body's also busily destroying it. So that the body chemical never gets a chance to do its work because it's being destroyed. And I've had some amazing results with it for things like PMT, as I say, thyroid problems, helping people, diabetics, helping normalise blood sugar, just a whole array of different things.
Got anything on the thyroid?
Well, often I find with thyroid, there's a whole load of thyroid hormones involved. And there's also pituitary hormones as well that control the thyroid hormones, the production of the thyroid hormones. So they will often come up. I mean, at the end of the day, as we know, everybody's individual and different people will need different things. Even people with identical symptoms can need completely different treatments. Yeah? There are lots and lots of different hormones, and I mean we're familiar with some of them. Maybe you've heard of like thyroxine, or you've heard of insulin, or have you heard of progesterone? There's a lot of stuff that you probably haven't heard of. One of my favourites, if you're allowed to have a favourite body chemical, one of my favourite body chemicals is anandamide, and it's also known as the bliss molecule. I read an amazing scientific paper some years ago about how the anandamide in the newly forming fetus calls to the mother. So it's just an extraordinary, and you know, this was in a scientific journal, and it's not calling like verbally, it's a chemical signal, and it helps the baby to dock inside the mother. So that's one of the things it does. Now, those of us who are of certain years think, well, that's not particularly interesting for us. But anandamide is the anandamide receptor. Cannabis uses the anandamide receptor. That's how anandamide was found, because the body has a receptor for cannabis. Now, that doesn't make sense. We weren't designed, we didn't evolve to use cannabis. So scientists started saying, okay, so this receptor that binds with cannabis, what's it actually intended for? And the thing it's intended for is anandamide. So anandamide is also known as the body's cannabis. And if you think about, those of you who know a little bit about cannabis, some of you don't, but anyway. So cannabis gives you the munchies, makes you hungry, so does anandamide. Anandamide also, cannabis can make you feel at peace with the world, slightly spaced out, slightly happy. So can anandamide. So anandamide is involved in mood swings, it's involved in appetite. Now you may be sitting there or thinking, but how do I know all this? Well, we have an anandamide vial in the test kits, it's in one of the biochemicals kits. And also, we have a lot of backup information about the kits. You can download it from the website. It's a big PDF because there's a lot of kits. But one of the things I always like to give is the backup information, so that then if you're working with a client or a patient and anandamide comes up and the client says, well, what does anandamide do? You don't have to feel stupid and say, I don't know. You can actually look at all the information we provide, because it actually gives all that information and a lot more about anandamide and other things as well. The body produces a lot of substances that can be used in energy mismatch. So we've got sweat, tears, you've got pus from boils and spots, you've got nails, hair, stuff from the nose, earwax. That's not a comprehensive list, but I think you get the idea. And you can use any of these as part of an energy mismatch procedure. Now this seems probably really a bit off the wall, really strange, but all of these samples contain things. I read a really interesting paper this weekend about how arsenic is found in toenails, particularly men who drink beer and women who drink a lot of white wine, or people who eat a lot of Brussels sprouts. And there's a lot of arsenic then in your toenails. They didn't explain the mechanism or why it ends up in the toenails rather than in the nails on the hand or something. But you may be doing a correction using toenails, and you could be correcting arsenic. You could be correcting other things as well. It can be very useful for things like coughs and colds. When my children were small and would come home from school, and one of them would have a runny nose, the first thing I'd do was wipe the nose, not because I was a sort of clean and caring mother, but because I wanted to capture a sample. And then I would check the child on that sample, because there's a good chance that in the sample will be the bacteria or the virus that's actually causing the problem. And then so down it go on CV6, and we'd do the normal thing and then test. And sometimes it would turn the child round instantly. What I would also do is use that same snot sample that contains the bacteria or virus to test everybody else in the family. And talking to other mothers, they'd be talking about, oh, little Jimmy came home with a runny nose and he was really ill, and then Sophie got it, and then I got it, and then my husband got it, and then my teenage daughter got it, and we've been, living with this bug for the last 8 weeks. And I go, we haven't. So it can really stop things in their track. That really cute stuff can be very, very good for. Earwax is something that interests me a lot. I've done some amazing work with earwax. Earwax seems to come up a lot for people with vertigo in particular. I've had some really good successes with using the energy mismatch with vertigo with earwax. I don't have any proof of this, but I think what's going on is that there are toxins in the brain that are giving the vertigo, and some of it's coming out in the earwax. So by using earwax, you're actually getting whatever is in the brain causing the vertigo. I did this once on myself. I had like a gastric flu, and once that had gone, I got really bad vertigo, which I'd never had before in my life. Did the energy mismatch using the earwax, and vertigo within half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, stopped completely. So it's really good for vertigo, migraines, things like that. Earwax is really worth testing. And one of the really nice side effects of it also is that actually then people stop having so much trouble with earwax. So if you know anybody who's got trouble with earwax, or constantly having their ears shringed or cleaned, or always poking their ears because of the earwax, then it's well worth testing them on earwax. So have we got anybody here who's got earwax? Oh, would you like to come out? Then Brian. Brian's volunteered because he's troubled with earwax, I understand. Is it both ears or just one?
Both. And from what you've been saying, it sounds to me that my body produces it, but then doesn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And it builds up.
Yeah. We've made sure Brian's balanced. And so I'm going to just test a cotton bud, or a Q-tip, I think they're called in some places, in the clear, just to make sure this is all right, because he could react to this. So if you just hold that a tick. So that's fine. So we know any reaction we get now is to what he puts on this. Yeah? So can you just very carefully just do one? Do the one.
That's the one. This is the one that's causing the problem at the moment.
Okay.
Come on, get some. You've got some.
Oh gosh, I see what you mean. So just hold it there. It's just below CV6, yeah? Oh, sorry, on CV6. Yeah. Okay. So the arm's testing weak, right? It was fine with the cotton bud on its own. With earwax, it's not. Right? So having got that far, you'd then go through the will the tapping work? Do we have energy permission to do it? And assuming you get both of those, you could then do the tapping. You don't need to know what's in the earwax that's causing the problem. And in general, it depends. If I've got the time, then I might be interested in finding out what it is. But often I didn't. I'd just say, OK, we're going to do earwax. And there's a good chance that, when Brian comes back, if he does for another appointment, he'll probably say, my earwax is so much better, I can't believe it. So even at that simple level, but also, it's an indication that there's something going on that's not right in the body. It's not just about the earwax. The earwax, a bit like the zinc on the nails, it's a symptom of something that's probably much deeper going on. Okay. I've said to you throughout today that it's really important to get energy permission before you work, to get that inner wisdom permission. When you're doing body samples, it's even more important because the body samples may contain other things. This earwax could contain several different minerals or some bacteria or all sorts of, some pollens, all sorts of different things. And his body isn't necessarily ready to do all those right now. So it's really, really important, in particular, in general it is, but in particular if you're doing body substances, because you've got less control over what it is you're correcting. Right. Okay, extending further still, we have using remedies. So we can use earth energies, we can use batch flower remedies, Pacific flower remedies, indigo essences, Australian bush essences, any of those sort of things. And once again, you can put them on CV6 and you test. And you can use the tapping technique. Now, people often get somewhat confused by this because they go, well, hang on a minute. If I had a remedy, I would take it. But if I put an apple on CV6 and the muscle unlocked when I hold triple warmer 21, then I wouldn't take it. So that seems really confusing. So I'll try to explain in case you're confused. So if I put an apple on CV6 and tested triple warmer 21, then that would indicate the person shouldn't eat apples until you fixed it, yeah, because they're allergic sensitive to it. But one thing you could do, one way of correcting an allergy sensitivity is to give the person a homeopathic version of apple. So it's, okay, you put the apple on there, don't take the apple, but you could take a homeopathic version. If you put an essence on there and it tests, the muscle unlocks, then again it's saying you wouldn't take that as a physical substance, but you could take it as an energetic substance. So it's not saying don't take it. So if you put an earth essence, or one of the other flower essences and so on CV6, and it tests the arm unlocks, then you've got two options. One is that would indicate either take it over possibly a period of time, or tap it in, or do both. A remedy that tests weak on CV6 You can either use the tapping technique, and then often you wouldn't actually need to take it. Is actually the simplest way of putting it. That's what usually happens. And that can be very useful, particularly for people who aren't very good at taking remedies or don't have the money to take remedies. By using the energy mismatch, you get over that and save them actually having to take the remedy. Occasionally you will get people where they need to take the remedy, where you do the tapping and they need to take it, but that's not very common. Right, now I've really widened this out, as you can see. Basically any substance can be put on CV6 and you can test triple 1 or 21 and see if the body recognises it appropriately or not. So the question then comes, if you've got a client come in, what do you test? Now there's several different ways you can do it. Obviously you could go through everything you've got systematically, one by one. That's actually probably quite time consuming and may take, it may end up the last 2 or 3 things you check are the things that are important. So that's, in practical terms, that's not generally a very good way to do it. In terms of allergies and things like foods and things like that, I would always ask people the question of, is there something that you really like? What do you really like to eat? What do you eat a lot of? Because there's quite a high probability that anything people like a lot or eat a lot of, they're going to react to. I've written a book called Allergy A to Z, which gives you a lot more information on allergies. And there's a whole section on like how time of day or a particular activity would suggest particular allergies or sensitivities. So if people are worse after a thunderstorm, that would suggest certain things that you need to test and so on. So that gives you a lot of background information that could be really useful for you. We've got this big PDF of all the test kit information. And if you download that, you can then search it. So say, for example, somebody's got colitis. You could search the test kit information for all the references to colitis. And that would suggest to you various vials from various kits that you ought to test for that person. Those are the things that would commonly cause the problem. Yeah? And also, if you're happy using verbal questioning, then you can use verbal questioning to establish. So you could say, okay, is it in one of these kits? If you get the answer yes, is it in this kit or that kit, and so on, till you find the kit and do it. You may want to narrow down which substances to test. You can test what the client thinks may be a problem. You can test what the person craves or unpleasant smells that are particularly liked. You can search the Life Work Potential test kit information for references to symptoms or illnesses. You can do this online, or you can download the information and just read through it. You can also use verbal questioning to establish which category or which type of substances to test. In general, you only do one item at a time. So you find what the first item is, what the priority is to do. You do that. Then if you've got time, you could ask for energy permission to do some more. Okay? So do we have energy permission to check some other things and correct them? Yes. Then you go back to the beginning again and go around the whole thing. Yeah?
So there's the question of if you're working on a client and say 3 things come up that need energy mismatch corrections, does it matter the order that you do them in, or do you just do them as they occur?
It depends how you're working. If you're using verbal questioning to establish what to test, then I'd ask, the question would be something like, what is the priority to do? And you'd find it. Yes? If you were just working slightly less systematically, then you'd find one thing, and then you would ask, do I have energy permission to correct it? Yeah? If you get the energy permission to correct it, you would correct it, and then you could then ask the question, do we have energy permission to do more energy mismatch work? Yes. Find another thing. Do we have energy permission to correct it? If the answer was no, then you'd maybe be able to do it on another day. Yeah?
But if the answer was no, then one of the things you might look at is there something else that needs to be corrected before
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Yes.
So it wasn't be a case of, oh, you've got to wait 4 weeks before you can do it. It might be there's something else that the body
Yes.
wants to do before.
Yes.
And once that's done, it's quite happy to do it.
Yes, yes. And say you had the whole day, you and a friend were doing an energy mismatch day, there's a good chance you wouldn't be able to correct things the whole day. There would probably come a point at when the body would go, you know, I've had enough, you're starting to overload me, so you'd stop getting energy permission. And, you know, you must always remember that the question is, do we have energy permission to do this now? When you get the answer no, that doesn't mean you can't do it tomorrow or next week. You could ask again at that point. Yeah. So the summary of the protocol. First, check that the system is balanced and you can get reliable answers. Second, decide what substance you are going to test. Third, test the substance. 4, establish whether the tapping technique will work. And then 5, check you have permission to correct the problem, to use the tapping technique. 6, carry out the tap. 7, check that the correction is now robust. 8, if you wish to do more, check that you have energy permission to do more. You ask the question, do we have energy permission to continue? If you get the answer yes, go back to step 2. Step 9, if you wish to stop, check that you have energy permission to stop. Do we have energy permission to stop? A strong, locked response means yes.